Evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for our monthly Unitarian Universalist Poetry Vespers. And I'm really excited to meet all of you. I hope that if you would like to join us again, you might consider putting your email address into the chat. We'd love to have you join our community. We meet once a month on the fourth Thursday. I only send out 2, at most 3 emails, so I won't be bombarding you with that, but we have a rich also archive of materials online to offer you. Fourth Thursday of every month, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Next month's poet is Ken Autry, who goes back to grad school years with me. A lot of fun for me to see him again. His recent book, Circulation, Naomi Shihab Nye stated that his far-reaching life equals a satisfying depth of his poems, a wide world in these pages and a thoughtful, humble vision. He writes with glorious precision and grace. The date is August 22nd, 24, 7 p.m., and I'll be sending out the usual email announcement probably next week. And I should say, in transition, he's at Auburn, and of course, our wonderful guest tonight is at Alabama, but there is no rivalry inherent. In fact, they're good friends. Hank has blurbed Ken's book, so that's a sign of peace. But Hank's latest book, As We Vanish from Public View, has been recently published by our newly formed publishing company, 7 Points Press. And you may recall, if you've been on with us, that we had a couple of months ago, we had a wonderful program from some of the 7 Points poets as well. Hank has published 35, I couldn't believe this, 35 books of poetry, as well as field recordings of Mind and Morning with 15 music poetry tracks, from Holland Hobson on banjo. And these are available on YouTube. Forthcoming this year is also Abundant Life, New and Selected Poems. He was selected for the highest literary award, the Harper Lee Award, for a lifetime of achievement, collaborated with a range of musicians, including Jake Berry, who's been a guest here at least 2 times for poetry and music. And Hank has exhibited a series of video installations of his Brushmind books. He retired in January of 2014 from the University of Alabama after serving as provost, associate provost, executive director, professor of English, continues to teach innovative seminars on Zen Buddhism and radical approaches to the arts of the Blunt Scholars in the Blunt Scholars program, and Ollie, and I really wish they were remote because I'd love to take that, Hank. Hint, hint. Anyway, let's welcome this prolific poet, but also a new friend for me. Very grateful to have him to our UU Vespers program.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much. And good to see everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to thank Nancy and also Dan, who's handling our tech matters for the reading today. We'll be moving back and forth in several different directions. Some of the YouTube music poetry collaborations will be part of what we'll look at. The core of today's reading will be a selection of 13 poems from As We Vanish from Public View. And then at the end, I'll be reading a couple of poems from the section called New Poems in Abundant Life, which should be forthcoming, I hope, later this year, but we shall see. I want to really, this has been an obsession of mine for a number of years, in part through Canterbury Chapel and the Episcopal Church here in Tuscaloosa, this overlapping area of poetry, prayer, and meditation. And I think that that's really at the heart of what I'll be reading today, and hopefully we can get into some of that in conversation. I'm in conversation with a range of different practitioners of various kinds of poetry and meditation and prayer and spiritual practices. I've come to know and think and experience that poetry, while it is dependent upon practice and the learning of a vastly variable craft, is ultimately a wisdom path. And what I mean by calling poetry a wisdom path is once one takes that vow, which I did over 50 years ago, once one enters into that path of poetry, just as in meditation, as in Zazen, which I've practiced for many years, it shapes you. It teaches and schools you. And one has to listen to what happens in the course of that path of practice, which is not to say ignore craft. We, learn your scales, practice, and write and write and write and write, and see what comes of that. But also listen to what that chosen path and experience of choosing something in our contemporary American culture, a very odd thing to choose to devote so much of one's life to such a seemingly useless and without profit in financial terms activity such as poetry. So I want to begin by simply thanking you who are here today and those who will watch this event later on YouTube, hence the recording. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to share with you some dwelling places for your own thoughts and practice. This is something that Jake Berry said to me when I was sharing the As We Vanish from Public View manuscript with him. And I've taken it to heart and I've thought about it a great deal. And I hope that will also be your experience today as we engage a range of poems. But I hope that the poems themselves are temporary dwelling places for you and your own thoughts, and hopefully some element of badly needed peace and quiet and deliberateness and mindfulness in the midst of your own day. And though Vespers is about the promise of evening, the day begins with dawn. And that is the first piece that I'd like Dan to cue up for us from YouTube. It's a poem, If It Is to Greet the Dawn.
Nine, 15, 19. If it is to greet the dawn. If that is what matters most. If it is a greeting of the light, if that awakening can be carried into the day, if it is as a lantern or candle held in the hand, if the eyes bear witness to the slow unfolding, the subtle caressing first light across the hillside and into the pasture. If often I am permitted to return to a meadow, if the light is the light of mind, and the lantern is the word itself, first light and first word, quiet and present as the pasture itself. Who sees it and walks here with 3 brown dogs? Along the horizon rings the tone of sudden change. This is exactly what happens as it so happens. Nine.
So the YouTube videos that you'll see, and they're readily available on YouTube, are from a book of mine called Field Recordings of Mind and Morning. Music is by musician, composer friend Holland Hobson, who teaches in New College, University of Alabama. I had known Holland more for his experimental electronic music, and one of my rare evening outings went to a brewery in town, and Holland was playing, and he was playing traditional Appalachian music on the banjo. And suddenly I began thinking that these poems I had written, mainly early morning poems, mostly written at Duncan Farm, which I'll talk about in a moment, I thought, that's the perfect music. And so I've been doing this exploration of what poetry is spoken word in relationship to a range of different musical possibilities. So I've had a chance to work with guitarists, soprano saxophone players, electronic musicians, a whole range. And Holland really reattuned me to my own poems, and they took on a different richness, so that the book itself really became a collaboration with him. And we recorded, the recordings we did were all done during the COVID era. We got access to a concert hall on campus for just 2 nights. And so the 15 tracks, almost all of them were done in one take. The photos you see are my own. The place is Duncan Farm. It's in rural west central Alabama. The nearest town is Carrollton, Alabama, which has a population of 990 people. And the farm is about 15 minutes outside of Carrollton down a long dirt road. Now, I grew up in San Jose, California. And if someone had told me, I went to undergraduate school at Stanford, started out in mathematics, ended up a poet, and did graduate work in Virginia. If somebody had told me, you're going to spend, I moved to Alabama in 1977. If they said, you're going to spend your whole life, adult life in Alabama, I would have thought they were crazy or really wanted to know what they had been smoking. And so we kept coming out to Alabama. My wife and I inherited this farm, Duncan Farm, about 10 years ago from her father, Dab, Harold Dabney Duncan, who went by Dab, and her uncle, Cooter. And Cooter was a rural mail delivery guy, and Dab and Cooter had this farm. And as they passed away, the farm came into our possession. And for me, it has become a sacred place, a really holy place. A few of you on camera have been there. 202 acres, a beautiful pasture, a hillside, a great place for the dogs, a creek, a farmhouse that's a little over 100 years old that my wife has been able to restore and renovate a bit. And so what does Duncan Farm teach me, which you'll hear in the poems? Well, I'm virtually a lifelong fan, really starting, gosh, in the late 60s, of Henry David Thoreau's work, especially the journals. And the photographs and the farm itself are part of learning to see, part of teaching me to be able to see clearly and be present in a place. And that is very much part of my practice, as is my Jewish upbringing and my 25 years of Zen practice. But seeing a place and knowing a place is a very slow, in my opinion, slow and fractal activity, in that day after day one observes subtle changes. One goes to the same place, different seasons, and sees the changing light. And so Duncan Farm is one of my many teachers, and the teaching that I hope is important in the poetry itself. So let's go to the second of the YouTube videos, Dan, to Time and Light, please. And you'll hear the variety of Holland's amazing playing. None of the pieces are alike, and they're all improvised. We talk, and then we play.
4/29/18. Time and light. Time and light. And the young cows. Time young cows peering out at us. Time and light. And the young cows peering out at us curiously through the barbed wire. Time and light. The forest runs around the hunting dog. Time and light. And the young cows peering out at us curiously through the barbed wire. Time and light. The forest runs around the hunting dog.
Thank you, Dan. Well, a few things to mention. Sometimes people ask me, well, what do you raise at the farm? And my answer is I raise poems, photographs, meditation, long walks with dogs, a little bit of cooking. We lease the farm. We lease the farm to somebody who knows what they're doing, who will raise cattle there and have the opportunity probably for 3 good crops from the 60 acres of beautiful bottomland pasture. And farmer right now is a guy named Chipper, who's 6'8", 300 pounds, and a 26-year-old guy who really enjoys having his cows there. I was taught a little over 50 years ago about the inseparable relationship between reading and writing. And the poems and field recordings often include quotations from Dogen, a 13th century Zen priest and writer who traveled to China and returned to Japan to develop the Soto Zen school of Buddhism with its strong emphasis on meditation. So oftentimes in the field recordings poems, there's quotation. So my reading and writing are blended. If you hear a really interesting line, it's probably Dogen's and not mine. So the forest running around the dogs, for example, that's Dogen, not me. And the fusing of the two is part of what happens in the course of these poems, a kind of tribute to Dogen. And the title of the book refers as well to Alan Lomax's field recordings of blues and folk music in the Deep South, the 20s and 30s. So my poems are explorations, recordings of what I think of as momentary experiences of a mind awakening in the morning. So I've been really obsessed with study of consciousness in many different forms, but especially just the peculiar grace of our mind as it moves and shifts in different directions. I just love that moment. So my poems often are written in the early morning. They are improvisatory in their own way, akin perhaps to calligraphy or improvisatory jazz, very much deeply of that moment of experience of mind awakening. You can find out a lot more about that book, Field Recordings of Mind and Morning, and Duncan Farm, and others of my 35 books at my poetry website, hanklazer.com. And maybe Dan can bring that up for a second here. Again, if you go to hanklazer.com, a lot of information about all the poems, blurbs, what people have written, that sort of thing, but also access in a convenient way to the YouTube recordings and anything else that might interest you, including I also do workshops related to poetry and meditation. That's noted there as well. Let's listen. Let's take a moment with one more of the YouTube's recordings, So the Trees Speak to One Another. Dan, can you bring that one up? Thank you.
7:4-18. So the trees speak to one another, underground and through the air. Underground and through the air. And I sit at daylight after walking the dogs up and back down the hillside. So the trees speak to one another, underground and through the air. Light streams in through eastern-facing curtains, and I arise. Underground and through the air. Light streams in, and I arise. Mountains walk. And the Sanskrit word Adimukti reaches me last night in the warm darkness, sitting beneath a dome of stars. At the very moment of sitting, what is sitting? Is it an acrobat's graceful somersault, or the rapid darting of a fish? Underground and through the air. Mountains walk. Beneath the dome of stars. At the very moment of sitting, what is sitting? Is it an acrobat's graceful somersault? Or the rapid darting of a fish?
Thanks, Dan. So it has been, again, so the trees speak to one another, in part comes from this astonishing book, The Hidden Life of Trees, book I highly recommend. It changes the way you look and are around trees for the rest of your life once you read that great book. But it's been for me a gradual process of recognizing and learning from a broad range of sentient beings. As this poem suggests, trees, but you'll also find the world of dogs threaded throughout my poems and my daily life. Let's turn to the new book, As We Vanish from Public View. And if you could pull up that cover image, Dan, that would be great. So it's an odd cover. The cover was a photograph taken by my son Alan a little over a year ago when we were in Iceland. And what I love about the cover of this book, there are no words on the cover. There's just this image. That's it. And Nancy, you may want to add the Amazon link is really the best way to buy the book if you're interested, or if you're in Tuscaloosa, Ernest and Hadley will be having the book available within the next few days, and for a reading I'll do there in about a week. But and Nancy, if you just put that in the chat, that would be great, the Amazon link. We're trying to keep 7 Points Press is a really exciting adventure, and we're trying to keep it minimal in terms of bureaucratic function. So We're trying to do a very simplified version of both publishing and distribution. But let me read, I'll read you a series of poems from As We Vanish, from Public View. And I'll just pause. The poems do not have titles. They bear dates in the book that you'll see when they were written. I'll just read you a series of these poems, relatively brief poems. The famed director called it nature deficit disorder. There are millions unknowing night sky and the language of trees. Underground and through the air, we walk between distracted, defended against this miraculous happening. Time takes us down one at a time. Earth is the bardo, a paradise for getting soul inscribed for its return. Alive at that time, I hold the book, capacious brain raining down its chosen rhapsody. Next poem. If it were to be as this, one by one, within this shining life, sing it so the moment resounds, joy of each and every, because you entered in incarnate instance of meat and bone, location for ongoing change, if it were to be as this. Next. A vine wraps its way up a tree trunk. To my dog Nate, as he is finishing a seizure, I repeat, I am with you. As overflow, he said and meant abundant life. Next. Don't try to do too much. How does the goldfinch manage transformation? Will it rain this morning? I remember her by holding her ashes, by giving them up to the ground. Japanese maple aflame in late light. How do you see it? Taking notice, emptying yourself. The goldfinch and the rose-breasted grosbeak. Next. If the chimney, if the flesh, if the diagnosis, if the time he has left, if the body responds more slowly, if the pair of pileated woodpeckers together hammer the wood railing, if the morning brings surprising moisture, if her voice can only be imagined, if recollection or the language of the crows is somehow not enough, if the ferns, gardenias, and wild roses have made it to return, and the deer bed down in nearby woods, if there are no clouds, if her ashes sit on a shelf above my books. Their nursery and ours, born out of darkness, bright fire raging in the void, a constellation or a human relationship happening with the exactness of lightning, or a contagious music, those sudden 1-second dreams, because you had been reaching out. It was what was given to you. You were being held carefully. Oh, so this is what I see, self dissolving by means of aging or practiced attention woven into fabric of tree, hillside, and pasture, a moment in which something has broken open. Fact is, the sadness of it all could kill you. I have it on good faith. The dog at my feet, chewing on a bone, will die, as will I, though who knows who goes first. My neighbor and I walk along the dirt road past the hay barn. We wonder who put out the poison for coyotes when the poison killed another neighbor's 3 dogs. Fact is, sadness turns to prayer. Fact is, prayer turns to song. Do I, or does the mind I have been given behave the way clouds do? Such is time by day and night. I live as a friend, intimate with the invisible. So do you. Where is the sound of these words as you hear them for yourself? Sun behind the cedar tree, shadows stretched across dew-covered hillside, dirt road stays in place. What do you call it? Step away. He slept through the night and into the morning without a seizure. Leaves turn yellow and pine needles rain down, half moon overhead. You are always somewhere, as is my cousin Ben, as is my sister Terry. What of the treasured and remembered dead, beginning with father and mother? Where? Now returned to faces before birth. Memory, too, has its seasons. Who do you recall as trees shed their leaves? Long ago, he chose to live in the woods. What happened to the books and all they pointed toward? You are here to pass on what comes to mind. Next poem begins with a line from a poem by a poet, publisher, bookmaker friend Charles Alexander, Tucson, Arizona, who has run Chax Press for many, many years. And that's where the Abundant Life collection of mine will appear sometime later this year. Somewhere head, perhaps, within gray day, without dawn, dry golden hillside above the pasture, mind, imposture, and a quiet being. Isn't it all ontological? What to study when not knowing is most intimate? And this, his last words. Head, perhaps, a rest within a mystery called time, and you are always somewhere. My Thursday meditation group, we've been spending time with doing koan practice. And one of the koans we've spent time with is a beautiful one, not knowing is most intimate, which are reputed to be the last words of a poet priest friend in Birmingham as he passed away prior year. If you're interested in koan practice, a great book is Joan Sutherland's Through Forests of Many Colors. Beautiful, beautiful vernacular koan practice that she's developed. Up the ladder to the home, not this house, but another. Never more than this. First winter-like day, sunrise and steam rising from golden brown grass, dormant, as in who is yet to awaken. Particles vanish, invisible subatomic particles dance about, evading our crude detection. Up the ladder to a hidden house. And one last from As We Vanish. What he shot, he dragged back to the house to cure, said green meat is the worst. part and parcel, the gift I carry with me. A word might bring it to a boil, in sight of a path to the afterlife. What you had seen and been vanished within your forgetting. I don't outlive my sorrow. I am with it. Floating island, a word adrift. Is there ever enough of being here to notice and to thank? Let's see how we're doing on time. I'll read two concluding poems, one called Duncan Farm November Meditation. And Dan, if you would show the image that accompanies that poem. And this is a little longer poem, and it's from the Abundant Life new section, new and selected poems. Read this poem, which is in 10 sections, and then a very short one to end, and then we'll have some time for conversation. Duncan Farm November Meditation 1. What died with father? What died with mother? There was more I wanted to know. Say again the names of distant places: Russia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Harbin, Yokohama, San Jose. Tell it all now, invisible as you are. There was more I wanted to hear. You are not your body. You are not your mind. Who were you? And where do we come from? 2. One by one, they go away. Mystery repeats itself. The equal loneliness of each soul here and there. 3. Small dance of wind from cedar to oak. Mind in its own instance. This is called thinking. Sometimes at play, sometimes answering to an invisible summoning. Small dance of wind, beginning with a distant pine. 4. Wildly disordered as it happens, clouds, moment, twisted, disappearing chronology of a human life, ample in complexity beyond any telling of it. Why not a tree's or a dog's experience of time? What lies beyond the limits of our attention? Sit with eyes open wide. 5. Who is with you from all that was? 6. Piety kept quiet and the clouds were a revelation. This is where it all appears, because nothing in the whole world is hidden. Later that night, he found skunks in the hay barn. Yes, turn the light inward. 7. He had the fire then, and hardly anyone noticed. That is the nature of this exacting path. So as you go, it will shape you as needed. Along the way, self-pity and disappointment burn away. Hold the ember dear. It is the given gem. 8. Farm at night, thin line of dim light along the horizon, like the implicit gap between blocks of color in a Rothko painting. My oldest Boykin, Walt, buried nearby up the way. This morning, halfway up the hillside, just beyond the cedar tree, I find a large silver wrench. Some words have nothing to do with our 5 or 6 senses. 9. In and out of morning clouds, I sit in the crosshairs of the window pane. 10. His joy was more than others could accept. So too his sorrow. Soon it will be light. Each has an instrument, idiosyncratic, played or simply listened to. Be still and listen. And the final poem I'll read, also from the forthcoming Abundant Life. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they are seeking a blessing. Awe surrounds us in all that is. to see God, the light, too bright, and all gone dark, and the darkness becoming stars and constellations, synapses of being and being seen, forms incarnate, and a brief flickering of consciousness, momentary, partial, and impermanent. Blessed are the pure who cannot endure the word and the way, swaying like branches on a summer tree. And again, my thanks to Dan and Nancy and 7 Points Press and Vespers and the Unitarian Church in Detroit, and to Wayne Sides, Jake Berry, and John Berry, longtime conversational partners. So I
And
look
I should
forward